when it comes to the word criminalization, and too often we tend to think about the very fundamental concept is people commit crimes. Of course, we're in this day and age that when people are committing crimes, it's not just about their ruthless behaviors. Right now today, we are also paying attention to the weapons they're using today. Given the fact that today, regardless which country you're living in, on the daily basis, some countries today are experiencing this heavy criminal behaviors more and more. But meanwhile, I'm not sure that if you have heard that actually some of the weapons today are being produced because this advanced technology, for example, this 3D print can actually produce firearms which could generate much greater threat not only to individuals but also among the societies. So that's why today it's crucial in this episode we need to talk about how this far more advanced technology like 3D actually creating such troubling issue or troubling topics for the younger generation and also the world today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished guest, and which is Maria Zuppello. Again, if you're familiar with Maria's work, and she's an international journalist, and also she's a renowned investigative journalist that her topic focuses on political and also social and of course economic issues across the board. Well, anyway, Maria, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Maria, the pleasure's all mine. Now, again, as we mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote and which is entitled 3D Firearm Proliferation Among Latin American Criminal Organizations. Now, let's dive into this article. As I mentioned in the intro, when we talk about criminalization today, too often we tend to focus on the behavior of the individuals or the behavior of collective actions. But we don't really talk about how such technology as 3D print can actually link to the development of criminalization. Of course, in this article, you mentioned, according to the European Commission, the multidimensional, which is 3D or 4D printer market, is estimated to be worth 9.64 billion euros. Maria, the first question, why do we need to understand this today, and how concerning is this 3D firearm proliferation today?
I'm talking about Latin America, that is the region that I'm covering, and 3D weapons are really something new. I think that my paper was the first one to collect all the documented data about this topic. Outside Latin America, as you know, in the United States, in Europe, 3D weapons are a huge problem. Europol organized a conference a few months ago about these topics. Sorry. So why is it important to see this new wave of criminal pattern in Latin America? Because unfortunately, 3D weapons is just a piece of a much more complicated puzzle where you have drug production, drug distribution, and money laundering of the proceeds from drug smuggling. And it's important to highlight that Latin America is not only the region of local criminal groups like Mexican cartels or the first command of the capital in Brazil. We are seeing since I think 10 years the presence of important European mafias. I'm Italian, so I'm really sensitive about this topic. And 'Ndrangheta in the last 10 years create an empire in Latin America. Create a logistic with the help of local criminal groups. We have Albanian Mafia. We have a confederation of 14 clans called Compagnia Bello. And at this moment in Ecuador, for example, they are really running and booming an impressive market. And Ecuador is not a producer of cocaine, but became a hub for cocaine to United States and to Europe. So in such a criminal landscape, 3D weapons are another tool to increase criminal capabilities, and at the same time enable to small groups to start having their own weapons, which means that, for example, in 5 years, we can see big cartels like the Mexican, like the Brazilian one, and at the same time, small groups that are related, linked by, for example, territorial proximity or I don't know, other elements. So what the 3D weapons are bringing to Latin America in a few years, we can make a prediction, is a more complicated conflict scenario among the cartels. And second one, what we can see is that, yes, in Latin America, we don't have the extremism that you have in the United States, for example, where you have a well-organized militia with rules, with trainings. In Latin America, this phenomenon is the beginning. But don't forget the past. Latin America, after the Second World War, hosted a lot of true Nazis from the true Nazis. So this pattern remains and can explode anytime. That's why, for example, in southern Brazil, authorities discovered a 3D printer in extremist groups with swastika, with other Nazi insignia. So what does it mean? It means that if you have a radical ideology, 3D weapon is the perfect weapon because it's you that produce against the state, against the control of law enforcement. So the 3D weapons bring to your ideology more meaning, a symbolic meaning. So this is another part of the story. But why we are seeing 3D weapons also, for example, in Mexico, which is very strange because, as you know, Mexican cartels carry drugs to the United States.
That's right.
Bring back weapons from the United States. It's an old scheme. Why? Because, first of all, criminal groups are always happy and glad to experimentate new technologies, because technology is power, and if you have a control of technology, you can have more chances to increase your criminal capability. So first, we can see this point. And then because 3D weapons are very profitable because they allow you to have a cheap maintenance of the weapons. One of the big problems is that you can buy, for example, weapons. You can smuggle weapons from the United States. You use weapons, and they use a lot. So if you, at a certain point, you need to, you have a problem of maintenance. And maintenance sometimes is hard because you need professional people doing this. It's very expensive. With 3D parts, you can resolve this problem. And we see this utilization in Brazil. We have a criminal group in Rio de Janeiro that started sending from Miami parts of weapons just to assemble in Rio de Janeiro with 3D printers. So the assembling parts that the 3D weapons enable are really important also for the time of life, the expectative of life of weapons. Don't forget that, for example, in Brazil, the majority of weapons in the hands of criminals are legal weapons. Because it's very easy to steal, it's very easy to have, we have a lot of corruption, so corruption opened the doors that legality closed. So it's interesting that in such a free market, criminals are trying to experiment, to attempt this new market, but it's just the beginning. So I think that when we see phenomenon at the beginning, we need to understand why and what will be the next step.
You know, Maria, it's interesting that you use Brazil. Of course, this is one of the countries that you specifically mentioned in your article. And again, I want to read something to you and again, help us to understand the meaning in this deeper way. This is what you wrote, and I quote, Brazil has shown the most interest among Latin American countries in 3D print weapons. In May, authorities uncovered a clandestine facility, and again, near Porto Algeria in southern Brazil. But the truth is, Maria, we know that today the country of Brazil is standing at the crossroads, politically speaking and also economically speaking. But if this 3D print or if this illegal weapons has become a major problem for the country, why has the government not done anything to curb the spread of this trend or curb the spread of this behavior? Ultimately, the government has the power to understand the threat of the 3D weapons or 3D print weapon proliferation, and also they have the sole power to minimize the threat to individual and also to the society. So how come so far we have not heard or we have not seen any changes from the official perspective?
We had just one big change with the new government on Inácio Lula da Silva, which is the change of regulation about normal firearms. With the Bolsonaro government, the number of weapons increased enormously, I think 700%, because they authorize the personal use of weapons. With the new government, this authorization must be reviewed, so people must denounce their weapons, and the idea is to reduce the weapons, which is a good step. The problem is that we need, from one side, to control the consumer market, okay, but there are no measures against the most important criminal groups in Brazil, which are the owners of the weapons market. So the question why the government didn't plan anything against the weapons must be put inside a larger scenario. What are the tools that the government is providing to fight organized crime in Brazil, which is a very complicated stuff because, as I told you, we have a Brazilian, but in Brazil, the Italian Mafia and 'Ndrangheta is powerful. The question is, if you want really to fight this huge problem, you need international cooperation. And international cooperation, it's hard to do because intelligence agencies don't share information. So it explains why we had brokers operating in Brazil, why it takes so long to arrest them, why people, fugitive from Italy, come to Brazil. So you need to understand that, and the same problem we have in Italy, do we have a will to really resolve this problem? Actually, drug smuggling provide a lot of money for the white economy, the white collar, and for the politics too. So the question is, the 3D weapons, I'm not surprised that there are no measures. Even in the United States, it took a long to understand the threat of 3D weapons. It's a very complicated topic. But here it's much more complicated because the criminal landscape is booming. Just to have an idea, we had information in Brazil that the cartel of Sinaloa is trying to produce fentanyl, which is a I mean, I'm giving you this scoop. There are investigative information saying that the cartel of Sinaloa is trying to work with local organized crime groups to manufacture fentanyl in Brazil. As you can imagine, this is going to change the criminal landscape not only in Latin America, but also for the United States. The question is why Brazilian criminal groups are interested in changing their business products, because fentanyl proved to be very profitable. I mean, you can sell you minimize the risk of smuggling and you maximize your gains. So I think that we have to understand that criminal groups in Latin America are thinking, have a mindset like an industry. It's an industry. And as all the industry, they're trying to be technologically advanced, to collect intelligence. Is a huge problem because, for example, in the jails, they have intelligence. They have their own lookout. And for example, another piece in the meaning of the technology advancement: drones. Small drones, small commercial drones became a huge problem in Latin America, not only because Mexican cartels are carrying drugs through the border, but also because we saw this in Ecuador, in Brazil, criminal groups use drones loaded with explosives, usually C4 explosives, just to increase the level of conflict inside the jails. So in Ecuador, we see it last year, and there were Mexican cartels behind. In Brazil, it's very common, smuggling drugs or smuggling intelligence operations. For example, 2 years ago, there was an attempt for the escape of a leader of PCC, Command of Capital, Marcola, and according to police investigations, drones have been used just to collect intelligence around the prison where the plan was conceived. It was a failed attempt, but drones were part of the operation. And, for example, remaining in Brazil, we have in the last 5 years, PCC began starting the so-called cangaço. Cangaço are robberies, very, very important robberies that can last one night in a small city where all the population is taken in hostage with explosive, and they use drones. So 3D weapons, drones are just different phases, different of the same person, which is the criminality that is emerging in Latin America, and that can be a threat not only for the region, but as I say, for Europe and United States.
You know, Maria, it's interesting, again, going back to the article, of course, that throughout the description, not only we understand this 3D printing, again, we talk about this technological advancement actually provide or serve as a mechanism for criminalization organizations to advance their criminal behaviors. But meanwhile, within the article, you also mention, again, you touch on briefly, is the country of Mexico. And again, this is something that you wrote, and I want to go back to the article. You said Mexico is the world's 5th biggest illicit arms market, which worth more than 13 million illegal guns. Almost 70% originated from the United States. And we know today, when we talk about Mexico, Mexico is on the border with the United States. Now, Maria, the next question is very simple. What is the attitude from the U.S. government? How come the U.S. government cannot collaborate with the Mexico government? Again, going back to the point, to reduce the illicit arms market. So in other words, why can't we treat this as one international effort instead of doing it as a separative project? What do you think?
Because of the political agendas. We recently see Mexico, DA denounced the difficulties that they have in exchanging information with Mexican authorities about fentanyl. So when you have political agenda, and drugs is part of political agenda, because these new pink waves in Latin America believe in the legalization of drugs, believe that all the problems come from the criminalization, which in my opinion is totally wrong, because as we saw, for example, in California, in Uruguay, with the legalization of marijuana, the dark market didn't stop. On the contrary, it boomed, because the dark market provide to the consumers more addictive drugs. So the problem is that we have in Latin America countries with specific political agenda, and weapons. Mexico, I mean, it's a kind of perfect example of corruption, of politicians that are involved in drug trafficking. So I don't expect very much from this country, because everyone take advantage from this market, weapons, drugs, and whatever. But again, the information that I collected about Mexico actually are related to, if I remember, 2015. So it's quite time. But it's important because it gives us the general idea that cartels are much more ahead than law enforcement. So I think that the United States should change their mindset. I give you an example. 2 years ago, I was discussing about drug in the United States, and I heard from my ears, from very, very professional people involved in analyzing organized crime, that say to me, there is no drangita in the United States, which is ridiculous, because it means that you don't see the danger, and if you don't see the danger, you say that the danger doesn't exist, which is not true, because drangita is interested in the United States for money laundering activities, the white collars that we were talking about. And when you have money laundering activities, yes, your economy takes advantage of it, but at the same time, you allow a criminal humus to proliferate, and drangeta is very, very powerful. So going back to Mexico, if you look at the documents of the border law enforcement, they recognize the huge problem that they have in ensuring security at the border. First of all, because it's a huge border with a very harsh environment, and also because the technology that the cartels are experimenting is such a commercial technologies that rather they can't recognize. I mean, a small drone that you use when you go on your vacation to film the beach, you can use for drug smuggling, and that's what cartels are doing. So the problem is investments, economic investments, but also mindset. The idea to develop strategies saying, so what can I expect from the cartels in the next year? For example, the information that I gave you, we have seen a law in Brazil. It's huge because it's going to change all the fentanyl logistic in Latin America. So it means, for example, that the ports in Brazil that are already used for cocaine logistics, I'm thinking about the Port of Santos. Imagine that in the last 5 years, in the Port of Santos, authorities seized more than 100 tons of cocaine. And as you know, what you seize is just a small percentage of what the true market is. Okay. And I can tell you that the Port of Santos, you have a very good team of intelligence from police, from different agencies. But the port is huge. And now, for example, there is a debate, there is a political debate, and we go back to the political agenda. They want to privatize the Port of Santos. They want to privatize the Port Authority, which is it's very critical because if you open to the market, the criminal groups, the big criminal groups that are already involved in high level operations of money laundering will take advantage of it. Look at the history. In Italy, we have the port of Gioia Tauro. Gioia Tauro is Calabria, which is the heart of 'Ndrangheta Mafia. 'Ndrangheta invested money in the port in the past. So the port was their own port, which allowed them to create an international hub for receiving cocaine. So I think, in my opinion, the United States should act at different levels. Diplomatic levels, putting in the agenda security topics, which is not happening to my knowledge. For example, we had the problem of Iranian ships. Yes, the U.S. ambassador said, please, Lula, don't do this. But the problem is much more important because what we can see behind is that Lula wants to recreate connections with the Iranian regime. Russia is already very strong. That's right. In Latin. I give another example. We are talking about drones. Okay, most of the governments don't have important anti-drone systems. At the local level, even worse. You have prisons that are not covered with anti-drone system. So, what is one of the risks that I see? Russia is producing very cheap anti-drone systems. So what they can do, and they already done is with weapons in the past, what they can do is sell for ridiculous amounts of money anti-drone systems through the technological penetration. They can have control of Latin America, which already happened in Venezuela a few years ago. So there are a scenario of risks that are interrelated, intertwined, and that reflect the political agenda. So the United States should work also at the political level to work for in name of democracy. Through democracy, not Venezuela-style democracy.
That's right, Maria. I think today, when it comes to the word democracy, it's not just about the freedom of ownership, and also it's the effort of international collaboration. Again, as we mentioned before, before diving into this article, again, I'm sure that our audience and viewers, few of us that we're familiar with how 3D firearms proliferation, especially among the Latin American countries that actually created a huge criminalization organizations, which also poses threat, not just for domestic market, but also for international impact as well.